to watch the show, Red Hood?
Nah, I'm just here to kick your ass.
Come on,
As
say
part
it
of our
again.
visit to Warner Brothers Games Montreal, we got to see a lot of Gotham Knights being played, but we weren't able to go hands-on with the game ourselves.
I
And
just
that makes
want
a traditional
the game.
preview a little difficult. Without having had
Like-
a controller in our hands, it's hard to say how combat,
A
working
whole
through missions, or making gear
month and a
choices
half-ish.
feels. And with that in mind, this preview will be a little more structural. With the help of the game's developers, we'll walk you through how Gotham Knights is put together, revealing brand new information about the open world, how supervillains fold into the fabric of the
Nice.
wider game, the game's neat approach to a day-night cycle, and more.
Never did truly get a day-night cycle in Arkham, did we? So I mean, that's
As we've spoken about
Something
previously
different.
this month, Gotham Knights' world is aiming to feel like a real city, with centuries of history behind it. Part and parcel with that is how truly open it is. The developers ensured that almost the entirety
open?
of their Gotham is open from the very beginning, with each of its 5 boroughs offering different traversal opportunities, different threats, different activities, and different characters.
No,
But the
yeah.
team also wanted to create
Arkham
a
Knight
sense
does
of the
lock you out.
city reacting to the presence of new vigilantes hitting the streets.
I
Yes,
would say
sir.
we start off the game in a pretty cold.
I do like
version
this Robin
of
outfit, though.
Gotham. The police don't like you. The citizens don't
Rah.
like you.
Rah.
And
No one
over
likes you.
time,
Got no
the
friends.
tone evolves because you identify major threats to the city. You can find out to a certain extent
Wait,
what's going on.
why would
on the
no one
surface
like
of
you?
Gotham, and you
Well, fine, we'll find out, I
gradually
guess.
build the confidence of the citizens.
Of course, some will always be on your side, and a group of citizens called the Watch act as an informant network for the Knights.
There you
offering
go.
up
I
missions
was
that
like,
will help stitch
bit
their parts
weird.
of the city back together, all of
'Cause-
which will see you head out into the darkness to help
I
bring
mean,
some light
you've
back
been
to Gotham.
patrolling
As it
for
turns
years.
out,
Wouldn't
Dark
make
Knights
that
in
much sense.
training like to come out during, well, dark nights. Key to Gotham Knights is that it's not a game with a shifting, continuous day-night cycle. Rather, the entire game is set over consecutive nights, with new crimes emerging every evening and villain storylines progressing alongside your work to stop them. The only time you'll see daylight in the main game is inside the Knights' headquarters, the
They've got a
Belfry, with
Windows,
plan for what to do after the next
but okay, yeah,
sunset.
as I thought.
The central
they had
loop of the game experience in
the
Gotham
Windows
Knights
thing,
is what we call our
DVD
Belfry
thing.
loop. When you exit the Belfry, it's always nighttime.
Dude.
You don't have to worry about when the sun's going to come up. But in the course of that night, you are going to there are
6
going
hours
to be some
outside.
crimes that and other
it's
activities
still
that
nighttime.
are happening in the streets of Gotham that are premeditated.
No.
They were predetermined by whoever was going to commit them, the day before. When you complete a night of crime fighting, and it's up to the player to decide when they're done, but like it could be a case of them saying, well, I think I've hit most of the major crimes I needed to, or it could be the case of them saying, I learned what I needed to learn and now I need to go back to the Belfry to advance the story, for example. Then you return to Belfry and now it's daytime.
Crimes
But
in Gotham
do
Knights come in
activities
many
change per
forms.
night?
They can range from procedurally generated muggings right up to entire gangs running complex operations. And the more you foil, the more you'll learn about crimes to come.
We wanted this concept of information scarcity.
Right.
So you need to find stuff out about the city night after night.
You already have a kind of activity queue that you can be tracking and deciding, okay, I think that's going to be more important for me to take on. Maybe this is more interesting to me because it maps better to one of the challenges that I'm trying to complete. Or maybe this has direct impact on me finding that next chapter in the larger mystery, right? So there's
I was
a lot of
listening, but
different
not at the same
reasons
time.
why a player might choose to go after one particular crime or another.
Unlike the game's checkpointed story missions, if you fail a crime, there's no opportunity to replay that exact situation again. It's all
Right.
part of the superhero learning process. Once you end a night, crimes are reset.
That
So
night
who's
is
failing
over.
the
crimes
the
that
crimes to get
didn't
unique
solve
dialogue then? Because I'm not doing
continue
that.
unabated, and now you're in a situation where you can look at what's coming up for the next night. So maybe you've collected enough clues that you're going to know in advance. Oh, there's going to be a heist at the bank, or there's going to be a armored car robbery, or someone's going to try to break somebody out of prison. In addition to that, there's a bunch of things you don't know about, right? There's all of the other.
So it's a way
crimes
to
that
make
haven't
the
been
game
revealed, and you
feel
can find out about them through
alive.
patrolling.
It's a system designed to keep offering
Interesting.
new ideas without feeling inauthentic
Yeah.
to how a real city might work. But of course, in a comic book city, not all crimes are created equal. Sometimes in your nightly patrols, you'll stumble across information that points to a much bigger, more recognizable threat.
Did you miss me?
Shout out my boy
We were
19
shown
Comrade.
precisely nothing of the game's main story campaign after its tutorial. The team clearly wants to keep its take on the beloved Court of Owls storyline as clandestine as the group itself. But the game's
That's
villain
fine by me.
storylines aren't necessarily a part of that darker conspiracy. Like any good comic book world, multiple supervillains are running riot across Gotham simultaneously, each with their own agendas. In Gotham Knights, that means that supervillain arcs are optional side stories taking place over multiple nights and made part of the open world itself, not just story dungeons. As you learn more about the villains taking on specific missions along the way,
I
your
guess it would be
Belfry
weird if the
evidence
Court of
board
Owls
will
was
begin
involved
to
with
grow,
every villain.
connecting clues to evidence and eventually letting
But
you
also at
trigger
the same
what the
time, not
team
really.
calls a villain night.
You know, when we talk about villain nights, we sometimes refer to them as epic villain crime, and it's because we always wanted the villains to be menacing Gotham City. We didn't want it to be a case of, oh, I'm going to go into this sort of bubble dungeon universe and Gotham somewhere else, and I'm just engaging with them here. And sometimes that means we do some fundamentally, you know, big changes, right? We like encase Elliott Center in ice. In the case of, you know, one of the later missions in the Harley Quinn arc, Gotham City Hospital is going to be, you know, invaded and is going to be thrown into chaos.
While it's very possible that these optional arcs
Then
could
the sewers
illuminate the
for
main storyline
Clayface.
somehow, the impression we got is that these standalone villains are there to enrich the sense of Gotham as a true comic book city with multiple threats to stave off at one time. And that applies to the town's gangs as well.
I still can't
As we've
believe that
talked
she
about
just did
before,
that for
Gotham
no
Knights
reason.
factions aren't just goons for a supervillain, although they certainly can be. Instead, they populate the city themselves, causing various flavors of mayhem depending on their affiliation. So far, we've seen
Hashtag the
freaks
shitty
and
is
the
dead.
regulators, and some of our footage has made mention of Red Hood's hatred for the mob.
Hey, look, more scumbag looking for a beat.
This feeling of criminal elements spreading across the city is intended to get across the endlessness of the superhero's job. You're
Didn't he
not
come
able
up
to
stealing
wipe
things?
out a faction from the map. You're simply stymieing their work.
You can clean Gotham of crime
Just
for
asking.
the night, but you can never stop it. Even Batman wasn't capable of that, and neither are you.
Practically, that means there
I mean,
will
there'll be
always
4
be
of us,
crimes to
though.
fight and combat to be had, but factions also provide another service. Each one is tied to specific gear, crafting materials, and other unlocks, which you'll use to beef
I want
up
to
your
see more
heroes.
Nightwing
We've covered
abilities.
Gotham Knight's many superhero suits previously, but that was very much from the cosmetic angle. From a more gameplay-driven angle, players will be able to craft gear that alters their hero's armor, melee, and ranged
That'll be
items,
my suit right
offering
there.
stat boosts and elemental damage changes. Crafting
samurai
that gear
stuff.
comes down to 2 things: having the blueprint and the materials to make it.
All of the gear is created through crafting. There are
Cool.
flavors of gear, and it applies in slightly different ways to suits and melee weapons and ranged weapons, but what they kind of have in common is this focus on these elemental damage types. Cryogenic, freezing damage, thermal damage, electrical damage, poison, stun, these kinds of things.
And those interactions should become doubly interesting by introducing another player into
Yeah, I
the
was going to say.
From day
One
the Gotham Knights
one
team
player
has
with
made
that is like,
clear that its take
sure.
on
2
two-player
players,
co-op is
then it becomes
completely
a different
untethered,
type of
meaning
game.
one player can theoretically explore another's world without ever having to meet them.
Anytime you're playing
What?
in Gotham City as opposed to inside a story dungeon as part
Hold
of
on,
one
what?
of the beats of the main mystery of the storyline, you're untethered. It also provides the most organic kind of superhero meetup opportunity where you think your buddy is with you and then he disappears for a while because
Mad.
you got distracted by something and you found a collectible. And then a second later you look up on a rooftop and a batarang comes out of nowhere and here's
Nah.
Batgirl and she's here to help you stop a crime.
That
Of
actually,
course, this
that's
could throw up
lit.
issues of how progression works for players and how players at different parts of the
Nah,
story can
that's-
interact.
that's
The solution
lit.
is elegantly unfussy. Characters of different levels will scale so that they somewhat match. Enemies will also scale to the player's levels, and most importantly,
Nah, I need a
progression
co-op
matters to the
partner,
host
100%.
and the guest.
When you're in Gotham, the host
Oh,
is
I don't.
their
I'll
story,
play with anyone.
but
I
100%
don't
of your
care.
hero
That sounds so
progression
lit.
is your own. And then once you return to your own Gotham, time essentially restarts in your own story. If you completed a major story beat, a villain arc, dungeon against the Court of Owls while playing with a friend, when you get to that part in your own story, the game will ask you, do you want to play it again? Or do you want to just kind of say, you did this part in some other universe and we'll just fast forward you through it?
But despite watching hours of the game being played live, there was a lot we weren't allowed to see. The game's main story missions are still a mystery to us, even down
Fine
to
by
how
me.
they're unlocked or displayed on the map.
Fine
More
by me.
intriguingly, the team repeatedly made reference to an endgame for Gotham Knights, but steadfastly refused to talk about it. Given the game's action RPG structure, it wouldn't be hugely surprising to find that it included an MMO-style raid of some kind, or
Give me a New Game
focus
Plus.
on the open world as an evolving space if Gotham itself was materially transformed by the effects of the Court of Owls. We just don't know right now, but the biggest outlier for us is in how the game feels to play for an extended period of time. Combat certainly looks interesting, perhaps a tad heavier than the Arkham series it will be compared to, and with a much bigger focus on using special abilities you've earned along the way. Getting
Yeah.
around the city, whether by parkour, grappling hook, by
'Cause-
fast travel paradrops, or the hero's unlockable abilities, feels like a genuinely fun first affair as well.
Because for me,
Gotham Knights will live and die on how these things string together.
any
and
of
how those
the
smaller
gadgets you
moments
earn
with
in
its larger
Arkham
structure,
barely
those
even
nights on
touched,
patrols, crime fighting, and
unless
clue
it's
gathering
outside of
feel as
combat,
compulsive as the team hopes
where
for.
they're
There's no
necessary.
doubting the enthusiasm and belief at the studio, but this game will be made by how it feels once it's finally allowed to be in our hands. This marks the end of
Nah,
the
that's
month
just
of
actually
IGN
lit.
first
Just the
content.
co-op
If you wanna
part
go
alone,
all the way back to the start,
100%.
we've got 16 minutes of the opening
I
gameplay
need
from
a
the game.
co-op
We've also got
partner.
a
I
big
need
feature
partners.
on how the
I'm trying to
team
hop
made a
into
brand
different
new
worlds
version
just to
of
appear out
Gotham
of nowhere.
City.
Oh, that's lit. Nah, they done it. They done it. It sounds good. It sounds good.